So we're looking at the Level 4 Extended Diploma in Business and Management now, and we're going to be looking at the Communications Unit first. Now, I know we're doing it in a slightly different order, but like I mentioned in induction, it doesn't really matter what order you go in, as long as you get the mandatory out of the way. So we're going to, oh, I've already opened up. So we're going to look at the spec sheet. Now, the specification sheet is this one here.
Yeah.
This up here. And when you get a little bit of a moment, go and look at this PowerPoint. This is just giving you a little bit of information about communication models. Now, the one that's most applicable for business is the one that I'll go into a lot of detail in. It's in our PowerPoint that we're going to cover. But this is for general information about what is a good communication method, what makes good communication, and the different models that are available, because there's loads.
Yeah.
We'll go back up. And there. So our aim for this unit is just to help you to develop your knowledge and understanding of all the different communication practices that happen in a business, in any type of organization. Now, you have different modes, different channels of communication, and we're going to actually learn what those are, how those are done. So we'll be looking at communication models, we'll be looking at different sort of communication channels as well. Okay. And to be honest, these are things you will be doing already within your role. It's just that you've not put into them. So when you apply it to real life, you'll be like, oh, actually, I do that. Now, going over the grading, you can choose to do a pass, a merit, or a distinction. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in our induction. Yeah. So the pass, you do all of the pass questions. For a merit, you do all the pass and the merit. And then for a distinction, you do all questions that are on here. Yeah. Some distinction and some merit sections are empty, so that doesn't matter. You don't need to make anything up to put them in. Just do what's there. Okay. So on here, it's a bit of a long unit. You've got 5 learning outcomes, and we're going to look at learning outcome 1, which is understand how internal communication takes place within organizations. Now, I'd like to point this out as well. When you go further down, you've got indicative content, and this one is really detailed. It gives you a very good idea of what you need to do. So the number 1 section, it goes through learning outcome 1, learning outcome 2, learning outcome 3, and then the merit question at the bottom. So it's got a nice big for each one. Yeah. This is fantastic for when you're doing your assignment, because you can just go back, double check that you've covered what they're asking you to do, and then you're on the right track. Yeah. So the PowerPoint onto here. So learning outcome 1, understand how internal communication takes place within organizations. So for the first couple of slides, we're just going to look at some key terms. Yeah. There you go. So what is communication? Now, communication is one of the most important processes that we do on a daily basis anyway. The way we communicate with different people changes. When you're at work, you'll communicate in a different way. If you're talking to your managers within a official sector, you're going to be talking in a more professional way. Yeah. If you end up seeing somebody, you might have made a friendship at work, and you're at lunchtime, and you're going to be a bit more informal, aren't you? The way you talk to your family is going to be different, and the way you talk to strangers is going to be different. Children, adults, so we differentiate, we change the way we communicate on a normal level all the time. We make it simple, complicated, but in the end, when we're communicating, it's all about us giving information. So you're transferring information. It's from one place or person or group to another, but you're just passing your information on. You might be saying that we need to get this passed done, or you might be saying, I don't feel very well. So there's a lot of things that you do. Now, when we look at the communication process, we just look at how it's done. So the sender, for example, if we're talking to you, if you're at work and you want to send an email to your manager, so you're the sender, you're putting a message together, you're probably saying something like, I've completed the tasks you wanted, is there anything else you'd like me to do? So you put that down, you're coding it, you're encoding it, so you're putting it down, you're thinking, what am I going to write? Because we don't write the same way as we talk. We do try to be a bit more professional when we're at work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you're sending it, that's the channel. How are you doing it? Is it a phone call? Is it an email? Is it a letter? Is it verbally? How are you doing it?
Mm-hmm.
When you sent that, or when you've passed your information on, it's getting decoded by the recipient. So the person who you're giving information to, your manager, is actually listening to you. They're understanding it. They're seeing what you're saying to them, and then that's them decoding it. Then they'll form a message back to you. So that's feedback. They'll be like, oh, okay, right. Let's finish these tasks. Now I want her to make sure that all the passwords are protected, or that we've got all our copying and filing systems are in good order.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll put that together, they'll encode it for you, they'll send it back to you, whichever way they need, phone call, email, so on. You decode it, and then you're getting the message. So you become the recipient. So you're just constantly like a cycle going on and on. Now, there can be barriers to this communication. There's a lot of different barriers as well. Things like, and we will go into that in detail, but just basic things like how you're feeling. You might not be feeling great. You might need to go to the bathroom, so you're not paying attention. There might be a cultural barrier. There might be a language barrier. Or there might be a barrier where they've sent an email, but somebody else has intercepted it. They've opened it. You've not noticed, and you've not got the message. So simple things. And then we go into models of communication. So the business model of communication is really similar to what we just talked about.
Yeah.
You've got a sender, they're formulating a message, they're sending it to the receiver gets it, they understand what's being said, they put something down and say, okay, I understand, fine, fantastic, and send it back to you. So it's the same process. So communication, I'm just going to go through this little table here. So the communication method is just a way that you present your communication, how you're doing it, what sort of way you're sending it. Are you doing it visually, giving a thumbs up or a nod? Or are you actually physically talking or typing something else? Communication is very practical, and it can be very visual. So if we were in a face-to-face class, you would notice that I use my hands as gestures a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think a lot of people do that, but even though we're not face to face, it's something I can't stop doing. So it's quite I always feel my hands just moving around without realizing it.
So that'd be visual then.
Oh yes, and even things like if you look at someone and you raise your eyebrows like, are you all right? And then they give you a thumbs up or a nod.
Yeah.
That's a visual as well.
Yeah.
You can do it using symbols or pictures, or sometimes when I ask you to do your assignment, I might say, oh, please include charts or graphs. Put in a picture that conveys what you're trying to say. So things like that do help to give the message across quite easily. Even things like if you think about work, when you might, in a lot of workplaces, I know that there are those health and safety posters that advise on how to lift heavy items.
Yeah.
It's written and it's picture-wise. Even if somebody couldn't really read it, if they had a barrier in that way, they could actually just follow pictures and understand what is it saying. So it's quite generic. Lots of people will be able to understand it. It's easy when you communicate, you adapt the way you communicate. It's easy to understand, and you do it in a way that your audience will be able to respond. You don't have to explain it too much. Sometimes if you're using visuals, a picture or a symbol will be good enough. It's not too complex because you're giving the right type of information for the right type of person. Good communication doesn't take too much time. So you'll get used to what sort of method you want to do, depending on what it is you're trying to communicate with, whether it's email or via telephone and so on. You'll choose the right method. And again, it's quite effective. So if you choose the right method of communication, then it's going to be effective. Now, if we were having a meeting and I spoke to you face to face and said, right, I want you to do task A, B, C, D, E, and I give you 5 tasks, and then you're expected to go away and do them. I can't expect you to actually stand there and remember every single task I gave you. I know I phase off after a few minutes and I'll forget. I'll be like, what was my second task? What was my third? But if I was to verbally tell you and then I would send you an email to back it up so that you can actually go back and refer to what, that's a better way of communicating, isn't it? So I wouldn't really go into too much detail. I'd just be like, as discussed, here are your tasks, and you would have a list of your tasks.
Mm-hmm.
So brilliant. So are you okay on, or would you like to ask any questions on the communication?
No, that makes sense, yeah.
So on to the actual questions. So 1.1 is explain the process of communication within organization. Like I mentioned previously, communication, good communication, isn't done easily, but it's something that you get better and better at.
Yeah.
Communicate well, which is I've learned throughout my years of teaching. It really does help the person that you're talking to understand what you're actually talking about, using the right method, the right tone, the right type of language. And it's something that we do automatically. I mean, if you have a child in front of you, you're going, especially a very young child, you're not going to start giving them really big words and, you know, saying unconditionally and all those types of things. You're going to break it down. So this is something that comes naturally to some people, but then for others, they need to work hard on it. But regardless, good communication is very effective.
Yeah.
Now, in this, I quite like this picture actually. It's something that I looked at today and I hadn't seen it for a couple of weeks, and I was like, oh, that's nice. Because on here, the lady, what she's saying is, your food smells delicious. So she's giving him a message, and he's just saying, oh. But what he's actually thinking is, oh, she'd like to try a little bit of it, probably offer a little bit of her food. So that is, it really puts into perspective what you're saying, what someone responded, and what they actually think about what you said. Now, communication can happen in a lot of different forms. It can happen written. So you can do letters, bulletins, or notice boards, updates, a newsletter, you know, minutes of a meeting, I don't know why these are repeated. But yeah, there's a whole lot of posters, emails, you know, there's a whole load of communication. Sometimes you've got your policies in and around your workplace. You might have a staff handbook that's given out. So there's a lot of ways that written communication can happen.
Yeah.
There are advantages and disadvantages to it. The advantage is that you've got a permanent record. It can become a legal document. So if you've got a minute of a meeting, have you ever done any minutes of meetings, Charlotte?
Any what, sorry? So just meetings or minutes? No, never done minutes, no.
Yeah. Are you familiar with what they are, though?
Sort of.
Yeah. So meetings, they're quite simple, actually. If there's a meeting going on, there'll be some staff that will go in, and what they'll do is they'll have a piece of paper or a laptop or some sort of device in front of them, and put down all the people that have attended. Then they'll put what the topic was, who headed the meeting, and then they'll initial so instead of writing full names, you'd put LZ said this, PQ said this. So you put down what they say, and then next to it you put down what their duties are or what the follow-up is.
Oh, okay.
So just seeing what they're doing. So that that itself, that document that the member of staff will make, can become a legal document.
Okay.
As well. Now, communication can be sent to multiple people at a time. So if I'm typing out an email, I can actually CC it to everybody, whoever I want to. I don't need to be writing it. It's fantastic for long messages and for official communication, because when I get something that's quite detailed, like if I'm told that I've got some new students joining, or if I've had 1,000,001 emails over the past 2 days sorting out my schedule for the next few months. If I was told that further, I would not be able to keep out. So I looked at my emails and I transferred the information I needed onto my diary. So I've got a good 2 written records of what I can refer to. Like I said, it gives you detailed information, and it makes sure that every single person that you're talking to, every employee, is on the same page. They're getting the same message. So there's no room for error. Well, there's reduced room for error, and no one can actually say, oh, you didn't say that to me. You said this to me, because you've got a record. The disadvantages to this, however, are that it can take a lot of time to draft, and you've got to make sure that your grammar is good, that you've got no errors, and that what you're actually trying to say is being said. That is one of the hardest things to convey sometimes. You'll write something down and you think, okay, right, I'm done, and then you realise you've not really put the message in what you wanted to say. You've just done a lot of fussing. I hope you will. Take care. Okay. See you.
Yeah.
That type of stuff. Mm-hmm. It's purely formal. So if I was to send an email to 20 of my students right now, I'm not going to. Generally what I do is I'll write dear all rather than putting everybody's name on. So it's not personal. Yeah. It might not be required for every single person that you work with. So you might have a mass email or a poster or a notice on a board, but that's not something that everybody needs to see. It's not confidential because once you've released it, it's released. It can go anywhere. It can be forwarded, passed on. You can't get instant feedback like you're doing a phone call. Even emails, simple emails sometimes can get a good, quick feedback, but with this, you can't get instant feedback. And once you've released it, you can't modify it. So if you've created a document, printed it out and sent everybody a copy, if there's a spelling mistake on it or a date mistake on it, you're most likely going to have to ignore the spelling mistake or, revise the date and another load of copies out again. Mm-hmm. So that's written communication. And to be honest, you probably already knew all these because it's things you do at the moment anyway.
Yeah, you just don't think about them, do you? It's just... Yeah.
So verbal communication. So verbal, obviously speaking. So it takes time and you can give information quickly. You can actually get somebody to clarify something. So if I sent you an email and you're not 100% sure of what I actually meant, you can just come and talk to me and clarify it and say, right, you sent me this email, is this what you meant? And then I can say, yes. So it gives you a personal touch because you'll be speaking to each person individually or you're speaking to small groups of people. It's effective for conflict management because if I was having some sort of conflict or some sort of issue, I don't want to get an email saying, I've regarded you on my terms, there's nothing wrong with you, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. No, person like somebody cares. And it's confidential, so you can have a, door closed, it can be done in a person, away from you. But the disadvantage is that it's not got any documentation. So if we spoke about something, it's not really formal, is it? Because it's not been put down in writing.
No, it's just said,
Exactly. And there can be misunderstanding, sorry. I bet there's a few situations when you've worked in or within your life that you've said something and it's been taken a different way. Yeah. So, sometimes you can say something trying to be nice and then it can be taken another way. Mm-hmm. I remember I made a comment that was meant to be nice to a person that I knew, and later on I thought, oh, actually, that sounded quite insulting. Me thinking he didn't say anything, but I was like, oh. So, even sometimes you think that, oh, hopefully they didn't take it the wrong way, did they?
Yeah, you overthink it then, don't you?
Exactly. Thing is bad. And then if you got a long message, it's the worst way to do it. If I was to be given a long message, and unfortunately I can't get over this, I've tried, but after about 10 minutes, I sort of drift off. So if someone gives a lot of details, I have to do a lot of things to keep myself active, especially in meetings. So verbal is bad for me.
I like to write everything down.
The same here. That's what keeps me focused.
Yeah.
Even if it's things that I don't really need to write down, make sure that I'm actually on track.
Yeah.
And then you've got an absence of a permanent record. So advantages and disadvantages of that. Now, visual communication, I quite like visual communication because you can actually do a lot through visuals. Now, visual is like face-to-face. Sometimes it can involve like some oral as well, like some prompt, like those type of sounds. So you can have, sometimes you might have a briefing that's given to you, an appraisal document-wise. You can do it by having like weekly meetings as well. So you're talking, but you're also face-to-face as well. And you're doing all your body language where if you're in a situation you're talking to your colleague, just imagine you're in the office and you're talking to your colleague that's next to you. You'll be able to tell if he or she is paying attention or not because of the way they're speaking or if they've got their arms crossed. You can tell how someone's feeling as well through visual communication. So there's advantages and disadvantages. Advantages are that it gets rid of language barriers. It simplifies the message, so the thumbs up will let you know everything. Easy to understand. It shows that you're actually communicating in an effective manner as well.
Yeah.
It's nice if you've got like images to go with something. So if I was talking to you about maps, I remember doing a lesson. I used to work in primary schools. And I remember you doing maps in year 1. We were talking about where we live and so on. And there was a whole lot of writing on it. The PowerPoint was one of those that fades into pictures. And I remember a whole lot of, and then kids were like, I don't know what a map is. And then when it came on to faded into a picture of a map, we're like, oh, you know what this is. Roughly,
so we did know, we just didn't realise, didn't you?
Exactly. It does make sense more. I can remember teaching an English class a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking, had an example of a newspaper article, just a paragraph on its own, and a newspaper article with a picture. So what they'd done is they showed that they were talking about a countryside. In the writing bit, it was boring, but when you actually looked at the image that went with it, it was like, oh, so you can actually imagine what they're talking. So a picture can portray 1,000 words sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Disadvantages are that it can be quite expensive to produce colour copies or copies of pictures and things in them. It's easy to pass out, and but again, expensive. You don't get any interaction with your audience. You're just passing them some pieces of paper, or you just start like giving them a bit of a thumbs up, and they could just be copying you, to be honest.
Yeah.
Passing on difficult and complex messages is not a good way to do this. It takes time, because if you try making a PowerPoint, you know how long it takes to put pictures and the borders and everything properly. And then going into electronic communication like emails, Facebook, WhatsApp. So these things that I use mainly on my day-to-day basis. WhatsApp for I've got some groups with my students on them. I use emails and and also this videoing conferencing site we're on now.
Yeah.
It's easy to communicate. It's instant. You get a record because I can record this, and we've got a record of it. I can keep a copy of my emails. I've got my messages. I've got an archive of those. It's fast, and it gives, for me especially, I find that managing my time using these electronic communication is much easier for me.
Yeah.
But again, sometimes having the right type of equipment. So when I was starting off, I worked from home. When I was starting off, I had to change from my laptop to a bigger computer. I was on it for too many hours a day. My eyes were hurting.
Oh, no.
So yeah, when you look, it doesn't help, does it?
No, I'm on the computer all day, and some days I just walk away and just go make a brew or something.
You do get I don't know how to explain it, goggle eyes or box eyes.
Yeah.
Like you're there, but you're not there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but things like bigger screens, they really do help. And
yeah.
I remember that when I was sorting out my setup, I got a writing pad where I can write using electronic pen and things.
Oh, that's nice.
It is, I've not really quite figured out how to use it properly yet.
Well, at least you got it.
Yeah, I'll figure it out someday.
Yeah.
Sort of, it's one of those things that I don't really touch that often because I'm not 100% on it. But when I get it, maybe
when you start using it, you'll use it all the time now, won't you?
Exactly, that's true. I hate using new things to start off with. It really puts me off, new programs, new software. But after a couple of weeks, you get okay with it, don't you?
Yeah.
Electronic communication, the problem with that is you can sometimes have a confidentiality. Like, I might want to send you an email, but I might CC somebody else into it by accident.
Yeah.
Or feedback to the wrong person. When you're masking or doing a fair amount of information, it is easy to do. And again, not everybody has the same access you might do. They might not have internet connection. They might not have WhatsApp. They might not have a laptop that they can go onto. So that can be an issue. And internet, firsthand how horrible it is. Internet's not working to full speed.
Oh, it's annoying, isn't it?
Obviously. Especially when you're so dependent on it as well.
It's when you need it most, isn't it? Then it goes properly in play.
But isn't that the way with everything? When you need something the most, that's when it always And then we have formal and informal communication. So we talked about this briefly at the beginning. So formal communication is when you're being formal. You know, you're being quite efficient. You might be talking to a customer. You might be talking to a manager or somebody that you know that is within a particular hierarchy. So
yeah,
it's quite efficient. It can be an easy communication system because you're not putting extra things into. You're not doing too many pleasantries. You're just getting on with it. It has a record. It's disciplined approach for communication, because sometimes if we get a lot of different people with different personalities, some will be friendly, some might come across as not conveying themselves in a particular manner. So when you're doing it formally, you'd really think about what you're writing.
Yeah.
It's easy to pass on authority and delegate duties as well. So you say, like, would you do this? Would you do that? And give everyone a task. And that you've got lots of different ways of formally communicating. So you can formally communicate over the phone, on the internet, through written. So there's so many different ways that you can.
Yeah.
The same goes for informal communication, but you create more of a personal relationship when you're doing informal communication, which is fantastic if you're going to be working closely with a lot of people as well. Having that rapport is very important. It gives you like an alternative for interaction. So, you know, you're not just going to talk to them all like, yes, did you get the business report done for me? You know, and all of those things. You do want to interact with them in a different way as well. Yeah. Sometimes things that are complex or sometimes things that are a little bit uncomfortable, they can be said better informally rather than formally, because you'll be more comfortable with that person, and you might use an innuendo, or you might use something that refers to a particular thing rather than using the official word, which might be a bit more embarrassing as well.
Yeah.
It's flexible, and again, it helps you when you've got a bit of an issue. If you're not happy with something, if you're going to speak informally, then it can help you when you're talking to your management, because they know that you come to them in a friendly manner and that you're saying, I've got this problem, and you're not filing a complaint.
Yeah.
We're almost at the end of this section. So you can have conferences and staff meetings. Within your role, do you do staff meetings quite regularly?
Not as much now. We do used to, yeah.
Yeah, obviously COVID has broken things down quite a lot, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but meetings are a great place. You start off, you get into the nitty-gritty of it, give all your tasks, you do all of that, and then at the end you can have a quick cup of tea together, or you can all disperse. So you can do, pass on all the information you need to, make it formal, and then you can have aspects that are informal as well.
Yeah.
And then you've got training events or webinars. So, sometimes you might be sent to training, sometimes you might be asked to do some CPD, like, even this course that you're doing is formal CPD for your work also. Mm-hmm. But really, it gives you a fantastic opportunity to learn through that training, to, find out, say, if you're going to a sales conference, finding about, how people communicate over there. It's a good thing for when you're communicating. I always ask my students to people watch. When you're going to work next day, especially if you're working in an environment where there are people, if you're working from home, it might be difficult. But when you go into work, just have a notice of how people communicate.
I think I'll be overthinking everything now when I'm at work. The way everyone speaks, I'll be like, right, let me get my PowerPoint up.
What are you staring at me for? Have you ever watched
Why are you looking at me like that?
I remember watching on Facebook once. It was one of those programs that are like, where they take make fun of news or something, one of those programs on BBC or something. But on it, he was doing some movements for a song, but it was on mute So
I've seen that.
Yeah, you probably have seen. I mean, because it's quite popular on these. So you just see him doing that, and it says, "Watch this and mute this," and you do, and you're like, "What?" And then when you the song, and you're like, "Oh my goodness, that's not what I was thinking."
No.
So it's an activity to do. So let's go on to 1.2, which is assess the appropriate use of different internal modes of communication for different purposes. So just when we say internal modes, it's just the different ways that you communicate when you're in a business.
Mm-hmm.
So for these modes of communication, the purpose is, why do we actually communicate? Sometimes it's to pass our feelings on. It's to make sure that we are communicating as well. Sometimes if it's gone really quiet and you just want to have a bit of noise, you're like, "You're right," a little bit of question, it's sometimes you can use it to build a rapport with a person. Now, creating a rapport can take some time, but asking simple questions and, showing an interest in them, it really helps. It helps you to understand, enhance your understanding, sort out any issues. And also, if you're feeling quite nervous or anxious, it's really nice to talk or to be able to hear someone talk about something else, and it'll calm you down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the different modes of communication are things like news and updates, a reminder or announcement. You might have like a book or a training session, some sort of leaflet that's saying we've got this meeting coming up. Sometimes you can have questionnaires or surveys, just, finding out what you thought of a service. And then, sometimes even like team spotlights and their accomplishments. Like some companies will have employee of the month, or they'll have some presents that they give someone at the end of the... And it really makes you want to work towards your targets, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now, we're going to look at horizontal versus vertical communication. But first, I actually want to tell you what those are, because I've noticed they're not written on here. Now, horizontal and vertical communication. Now, horizontal communication is just when you're having a flow of communication between people that are on the same level as each other. So, for example, if you're doing a manager to a manager, a sales assistant to a sales assistant, so they're talking along the same line, they're all in the same position. That is what we call horizontal. Just think of a straight line going in like, I can't think of the word. What are those? Oh, what's it called? When you go vertical and landscape. There you go.
Landscape. I'm trying to think then.
I don't know why latitude came in my mind. Yeah, so a straight line like a landscape that way.
Yeah.
Now, vertical information is like up to down. So is when you're getting a flow of information, so communication is being passed from like a manager to a sales assistant or to a warehouse worker, for example.
Yeah.
Or it's going from bottom to top, like a sales assistant is passing the information to the CEO. So is you going from top to bottom or bottom to top?
Mm-hmm.
Now, vertical information, the information that gets passed from different levels of employment, is more formal, because you're going to be talking to, like, say, your manager, so you really watch what you say. Or if your manager is putting a task down, they're going to be quite mindful of how they say it to you. So if you're talking to somebody that's along the same sort of level as you, so if you're sitting, you've got other employees or colleagues that do administration, for example, you're all going to be talking to each other in a more informal way, and questions. So yes. Now we've got horizontal and vertical. Now you've got upward communication, as we talked about, which is where lower level to higher level, so down to bottom, bottom to top. It's non-directive and it can be non-authoritative. So it's not much authority.
It's upwards the same as vertical communication?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you can get an opportunity to provide feedback, and it's things like reports or complaints or suggestions. So upward communication is when you're sending, say it's a sales assistant is sending the CEO a message. Downward communication is when the CEO might be sending the sales assistants a message. So it's from higher to lower. It's a authoritative and is directive because they've got the authority to get their things done. Down to up, you don't have the authority. You can make a suggestion, but you can't enforce it. But it's not the way when it's from the top. Things get done, and it's things like orders or instructions and so on that are telling you what to do. Then we've got upward and downward communication. I just want to clarify this a little bit. So upward communication is when you're sending information from lower levels of a hierarchy to higher levels. So when you're sending it from the bottom to the top, so it can be time consuming because it's not necessary that if I'm working as a sales assistant now, that I'm going to be able to pick up a phone and speak to the CEO. I probably have to go through my manager and they'll go through their regional managers. Who another, then maybe I'll get to the CEO. So there's loads of disruption in between, isn't there?
Yeah.
When it's downwards, it happens faster because the information is going straight from the top, getting to exactly where it needs to be done in a very fast way. So it has a lot of authority on it as well. So when we're doing upward communication, sometimes that'll just be like, we might want to send them like a suggestion of maybe the work environment isn't that good, or if something is broken that needs fixing. So it'll be like an occasional way. Downward communication happens more regularly because you're getting told exactly what to do.
Yeah.
So, downward communication, I'll go through a couple of these points. It's the process of sending information from a superior to a subordinate. It can include instructions, orders. It is quite authoritative, so you know that they've got authority to speak to you. And it can take place quite often. So it's not something that it happens once in a moon. It might be a daily communication. Upward, so it's when the subordinate is trying to talk to a superior. Sometimes you might have a complaint. It's not as frequent, and it can take time to do. So that was 1.2. Are you okay with this upward, downward?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So 1.3 is analyze barriers to effective communication. So when we're looking at barriers, it's just what do we count as a barrier? It's anything that will stop you from communicating. Communication barriers are things that will actually stop us from understanding a message or when you're trying to pass information on. And these are things like when you have a cultural barrier, you might have organizational structure barriers, you might have attitude barriers, physiological barriers, and technological barriers, and socio-religious barriers. So in a nutshell, it's just things like when you've got cultural differences, you might not speak the same language. There might be a lot of distractions in the background. It might be really noisy. You're trying to listen to somebody on the phone and you can't hear them properly because there's some people have come in if you're in a shop environment and they're making quite a lot of noise. Sometimes you're trying to pass on a message and the person you talk to is not even interested. And then another barrier can be that there's too many questions that, you know, if you're trying to pass on information and you think that you're giving them simple information, but then it's getting like question and dissected, and that can be quite off-putting as well.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of these things that are barriers. The noise section on here, that actually refers to a lot of different things. So the noise is things like your emotional state, what your physical state is like, how you're actually feeling, what sort of distractions are going on in and around you, or even an interruption. Say if I was to send you a fax, so I send it off, but then you don't physically pick it up from the fax machine. Maybe another colleague does, picks it up, looks at it and puts it on one side, or even walks it to you. That person there is that noise, they're the distraction, they're the barrier in between. We've got some examples of language, some barriers. So language is when you might have, and nowadays having employees from different countries is quite common. Pre-COVID, it wasn't. A lot of companies did it, but not as much as they do now. So sometimes you might have a colleague, say from say Thailand or from India, and then you might not speak the same language, or you might not speak it to the same ability as well. Too many questions is when people are asking too many questions. You've got a product to launch. You know, it might be showing that there's not enough confidence in that strategy, or it might even show that if they're asking that many questions, have I explained what we're doing well enough?
Yeah.
So that's an issue as well. Distance. So if, like, I work from home, we've got a lot of members of staff that work from home. We've got some staff that work overseas. When we want to get together, when we're trying to do meetings or physically go into the office, that can be an issue because obviously someone from overseas can't come in for a 4 o'clock meeting on a Monday, can they? So, you know, that is a barrier. You've got to try and get internet connection. You're trying to use the right things, and you can spend a good amount of time just trying to figure these things out to make sure that everyone can actually get on with what they're trying to do. So those are some of those barriers there. So we've gone over the barriers on that. Is there anything you want to ask in regards to that?
No, nothing to that one.
Brilliant. So on to the merit question, which is analyze possible legal and ethical issues in relation to communication of information within organizations. So on here, we're just going to look at some legislations, and some of these you might already be familiar with. So you've got the Freedom of Information Act, the GDPR, the Data Protection Regulation, and the Equality Legislation. And then it comes into effect things like your company policies and so on. Now, we're going to be looking at these, and we're going to look at what sort of legal or ethical implications can come in and how we have to work because of these policies and these legislations. So, Data Protection Act, I think you're familiar with the Data Protection Act, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So with this, because it's probably quite a big part of your job. So there's a lot of, originally, when I was younger, so a good 20 years ago, a lot of companies used to just put everything on paper, but now it's all done on electronically. Well, a lot of companies, and it's, how do you store that? How do you keep that right? So there's a lot of things that you probably already do, like you'll have password protected. There'll be certain things that you can access, certain things that you can't. I remember I used to run the Breakfast Club a few years ago, and I'd have to put the money tin away in this cupboard. But that cupboard actually contained a lot of physical paperwork as well. So it was all locked up. There's only one person that had a key, and I had to wait to go and make sure that she could physically do it and so on. So there's a lot of implications in how you work depending on the Data Protection Act, because you don't want your someone's information being passed easily accessible. So when we're storing information in organizations or in businesses, we need to make sure that any information we have obtained fairly and lawfully, that you only use it for the purposes that you've said you're going to be using it for. So if you get phone numbers and addresses and you start sending them off to some company so they can make dodgy phone calls, that's not part of why you collected.
Yeah.
You've got to make sure that it's adequate, relevant, and not excessive. So make sure you've only got the information you need. You don't need anything else. Keep it accurate and up to date. Like the information that I'll keep on my students, what course they're doing, what when they started, when they're going to finish, email addresses, phone numbers, and so on. Make sure that it's processed in line with your rights, so that, you know, if you are making copies or anything, that if you no longer need it, make sure that it's shredded and put into those confidential waste bags rather than thrown into a normal bin. And then again, it has to be make sure that if the information has to be transferred to an area outside the European Economic Areas, the EEA, you've got to make sure that there's actually adequate protection for it, that there is a framework in place that if you were to pass the information to another office, say in France, that they've actually made sure that they've got the information is going to be safe. If not, you can't pass it on.
Yeah.
Then you've got the Freedom of Information Act, and this act, it actually helps individuals or organizations to request what sort of information a public authority has on them. So if you want to find out what sort of information your old high school had on you, you could put a request in writing and ask them, and they'd have to reply to you. Now, they've got 20 working days to give you the information, but there are some exceptions to this, and that is if you trying to get records for yourself costs too much, if it's going to be over a certain limit of cost, then they can deny you the request. Like if, what I can think is like if Amazon, a corporate company, tries to get information from some place, then it would cost too much because there'd be so much information on them. It might cost too much to do. So they can say, give it to you. But for a person who's just trying to get data from when they were in school, or maybe contact the GP and find out what data they've got about them, that would be more liable.
Yeah.
So the Computer Misuse Act of 1990, now this actually has some activities that has legislations about how to use computers. So it's things like, you know, if you're hacking into other people's system, if you're misusing software, or you're trying to get into somebody's protected files, then you're protected against those. So this act is split into 3 sections, and it makes it illegal if you're doing unauthorized access to computer material, unauthorized access to computer systems with an intent to commit another offence. So if you're getting information to say do fraud or something, and then unauthorized modification of computer material. So if you were to get into my systems and start changing things, or if I was to do the same thing to yours, then that would be an issue.
Yeah.
Even things like sometimes when you're, I think it's not coming to more into ethical. I'll say on this in a second. So when you're looking at ethical issues, we've got to look at business ethics, and we've got to look at the principles. So what is acceptable and what is unacceptable behaviour by a business, and also by the employees that work for them. So you've got codes of practice that exist in these places. So when you're using email, you've got to make sure that you're following the codes of practice. Now, I remember one of my first jobs, I think I was 19 or 20, and I got a job with CIS. It was in the car insurance department.
Oh, yeah.
Very part-time. And I remember joining a new team, and then another teammate came up to me and she says, oh, will you send an email to this person here and here and just say, hello, I know, you know, there's that silly, childish thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm like, oh, okay, and I do it, not realising that actually that's not, you're not putting down who you are. Obviously, they probably could have figured it out from which would have just it came from. But you're harassing someone, aren't you, in a way? Or even if it's an email saying, do you know who I am? You know, that type of stuff. You don't know how it's going to be construed by the other person. So,
no.
I mean, which is why we've got codes of conduct now on how things are meant to be done. So when we're younger, sometimes we do silly things, even when we're older as well. But
yeah, still do it.
Exactly. I don't think there's an age limit, is there? But as long as we're trying to follow the code of practice that our businesses or organizations have given us, that's good. On the internet as well, about how we use the internet. So a lot of companies have intranet, so they've got internal systems that you can access policies, procedures, and so on with that. Yeah. With the internet, you'll be, obviously, they're not going to want you to sit there and watch YouTube, or there'll be certain things that, even if you can access YouTube, like in a school or educational environment, or even an office environment, you will need to do some type of search, but you'll have quite a few restrictions that are put in place. And it will be your user ID will be checked to see where you're going. So a lot of that happens. Then we've got whistleblowing. Do you know what whistleblowing is?
Basically telling your manager something that's happening, in a way.
Yeah.
Something wrong that's happening.
Yeah. So if you're, for example, if you're working for your company and you felt that there's a very high disregard to equality and diversity, or the safeguarding of staff isn't happening, you know that there's an error that's not being fixed, or there's something that you know that's deliberately not being done, or you feel like is might be a fraud or a crime or can be a danger, then you can go ahead and, you know, raise a concern about this. So it might be when you've raised a concern to the company, they've ignored you. You might go to the press, you might go to the police. Now, whistleblowers actually have legal protection. So if I was to go in, if I was working in a company and I said, right, I found this problem here, they couldn't sack me for whistleblowing because I would be protected by the Public Interest Disclosure Act. But I would only be protected if the offence that I reported actually constitutes to being a deliberate attempt to break the law. If it's something that was like, oh, I'm not getting my breaks on time, I have to take them 10 minutes later than I should, that's not breaking the law. You're still getting your break.
Yeah.
But if that is very serious, then yes. So there are protections in place. And then, onto here, we've got organisational policies. So you'll have policies in place with this as well, because, you know, you've got Equality and Diversity Act, the way you use your computers at work, even the way you dress. I'm not sure if you'll have a dress code for your office.
Not really, no, but I do try and wear office wear.
Yeah.
But you feel a bit more productive, don't you, if you're wearing work clothes?
And to be honest, going into work in a pair of jeans is quite, you know, tight. You don't
not comfortable.
Broken in, but yeah. But when any job that I've worked in, whichever one that I have ever worked in, especially in the educational system, I've always had a dress code.
Yeah.
And it's things like, it's common sense most of the time. Don't wear open-toed shoes. You can have students walking and running around. You don't want to get trouble. Make sure that you're, you know, wearing tops that actually cover your cleavage, so that if you do bend forward, you're not exposing yourself. Because, or if you've got something like that, put a scarf around your neck. You know, and it's same for men as well. Don't wear tiny shorts. Make sure that you're wearing professional attire, not too tight clothes. So depending on where you work, there'll be different types of dress code. Because I used to work with students, there was a different, you've got to put yourself forward as a role model. So obviously they want that students will mirror in a good way. So you've got all codes of conduct, you've got your policies, your health and safety policies, you know, risk assessments. You've got so many things that an organization, a business will do. I mean, if you think about where you work now, you probably do have, like, especially equality and diversity, you'll probably got a internet usage policy. You'll most likely have health and safety one as well. So there's a lot of things that you will have. And then the last part of this ethics part is information ownership. Now, if you're going to create any information, and it can be anything, you will be a part of your daily job, will be putting in information, you know, doing certain tasks. But if you were to create some information, like, create a database on a student or on one of your clients or a staff member, you are responsible for it.
Yeah.
You create it, you're the owner of it. So it's your responsibility that you protect that person's confidentiality. You are acting with integrity, and that if anything has to be changed, it's changed in a correct manner. So it's not done with the, you know, putting silly nicknames on or making derogatory remarks on their file or anything like that. That you are with protecting it. You know, the basic things just to cover yourself on here.
Yeah.
So that was the part of ethics and how we act ethically within work. Would you have any questions on here?
No, I don't know. That was good, yeah.
I'm trying to turn this record.